Back in 5th grade, there was this one kid in our class named Dylan who was odd, to say the least. Pretty much any time someone did or said something, Dylan would try to copy them. One day another kid, Alex, told that classic joke about why did the chicken cross the road. The class laughed, but Dylan just sat there, his eyes wide, absorbing every word like it was some kind of prophecy. Later that week, as we walked home from school, we passed by Old Man Jenkins' farm. His chickens were always out, pecking around the edges of the road, but they never crossed. That day, however, we saw something strange. A group of chickens, led by one particularly bold rooster, began to march across the road in unison, their feathers ruffling in the still afternoon air. "Dylan did it," Alex whispered, half in awe, half in fear. We all turned to look at Dylan, who was grinning, his gaze fixed on the chickens. Every day thereafter, more and more chickens ventured across that road. At first it seemed like a quirky town event, something to chuckle about. But then, the chickens' behavior turned eerie. They crossed the road at the same time every day, 3:03 p.m. sharp, regardless of weather or traffic. Then the town started noticing. People whispered about the chicken parade. Cars would slow down or stop entirely, drivers staring in confusion or fear. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange, the chickens didn't just cross. They lingered, staring at the townsfolk with an unnatural intensity in their beady eyes. Weeks passed, and the chickens began to follow people. Not just any people, but those who had laughed at Alex's joke. They'd find chickens clucking softly at their doorstep, or pecking at their windows at night. The sounds of their scratching against wood or glass became a nightly horror. One Saturday night, I woke up to a soft, rhythmic clucking outside my bedroom. Peering through the curtains, I saw not just one or two, but dozens of chickens, their eyes reflecting the dim light of my night lamp, forming a circle around my house. They stared unblinkingly, as if waiting for something. The next day, we confronted Dylan. He was in his backyard, surrounded by chickens, his eyes glazed over. "They're waiting," he said cryptically, "for the right moment." The town decided to act. They built a fence around Jenkins' farm to keep the chickens in. But that night, they escaped. And they didn't just cross the road, they stormed it, a feathered army, their clucks echoing like a chant. People locked their doors, but the chickens found ways in, through vents, under doors, through small forgotten windows. They didn't attack, but they just watched, their heads turning in unison whenever someone moved. By this point, the town was completely gripped by fear, and by the inexplicable. Theories circulated about Dylan possessing some dark power over animals, or perhaps the chickens themselves were under some curse or hex. Maybe they were just responding to the mockery of the old jest. Then, one fateful day, Dylan vanished. With him gone, the chickens stopped their eerie parade. They returned to being just chickens, pecking around without purpose or malice. But the memory still lingered, a dark tale whispered in the back rooms of schools, a reminder that sometimes a simple laughed-at question might awaken things best left undisturbed. And so, when anyone in town now mentions chickens or that age-old road-crossing riddle, they do so with a shiver. Their eyes dart to the windows, half expecting to see the parade begin anew. Our family used to go on road trips when we were kids, and to pass the time, my sister and I would play games, or really just annoy each other. On this one trip, I was 7 and she was 5, and at one point we kept repeating that joke about the chicken crossing the road. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side. My sister and I went on like this for an hour, laughing until our parents begged us to stop. However, the laughter stopped abruptly when, in the distance, we saw a chicken actually crossing the highway we were driving on. It was bizarre because we were on a long stretch of road with nothing but farmland for miles, no houses in sight. The chicken in question moved with purpose, not like the aimless wanderings of farm birds. It crossed with an eerie precision, waiting for a break in the traffic before darting across. My dad slowed down, and we all watched in silence as the bird made its way to the other side, disappearing into the brush without so much as a backwards glance. We all laughed it off as a coincidence, but the image stayed with me. That night, camping in a small clearing off the highway, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing soft clucking sounds, like whispers in the dark. I chalked it up to my imagination until I saw them. Dozens of chickens, their eyes glowing in the moonlight, surrounding our campsite. They didn't do anything. Instead, they just stood there, watching us. My parents, groggy and confused, tried to scare them off, but the chickens were undeterred. They just kept their silent vigil until dawn, when they dispersed as if they had never even been there. For the rest of the trip, every time we saw a chicken, it was crossing a road. Not in a normal scattered way, but in groups, at intervals, like they were following us or leading us somewhere. It was unsettling to say the least, but we were kids. We moved on to other games and other distractions. Years later, now an adult, I took that same route again, alone this time. As I drove down it, I remembered the chickens, and half expected to see a lone bird or two. Instead, as I drove through that same stretch of highway, I saw them, not just one or two, but a procession of chickens. There were hundreds, crossing from one side to the other and stopping traffic. I pulled over, my heart racing. This time they weren't just crossing, they were gathering. They formed circles around cars, pecking at tires, their clucks rising into an eerie cacophony. People got out of their vehicles, bewildered and frightened. And then, as if on cue, they all turned towards me, their heads moving in unison, their eyes fixed with an inhuman intensity. I remember the game, the laughter, the simple innocent repetition of a child's joke. Had we invoked something with our words? Was it some dark echo of our youthful folly, now manifesting as this chicken pilgrimage? The local news later reported on the chicken incident, but there were no explanations, only speculation. Some said it was animal migration gone horribly wrong, and others whispered of old curses or hexes passed down through generations. But I knew better. Those chickens, those silent, coordinated masses, were a warning, or perhaps a reminder. A reminder that even the simplest of questions posed in jest can summon the unknown, turning the mundane into the macabre. Since then, I've never laughed at that old chicken crossing joke again, not with the memory of those eyes watching from the darkness. My friends and I did a lot of stupid stuff in high school, and honestly, I'm surprised none of us got arrested, or worse. One time my friend Jeff got this full-size chicken costume, like the chicken on Family Guy, and me and my other friend Ashton filmed him as he ran back and forth across the road. It was supposed to be funny, especially since we chose one of those quiet country roads where hardly any cars pass by. We laughed so hard our sides ached, and every time Jeff darted across the asphalt, he'd flap his wings maniacally. It was all fun and games until the sun started to set, casting long, eerie shadows. That's when things got weird. As we were packing up, ready to call it a day, we heard it. It was a clucking sound, but it wasn't made by Jeff. Instead, this one was deep and guttural, almost like a chant. We turned around, and there at the edge of the road stood a real chicken. It stared at us, its head cocked to one side, its eyes reflecting the last light of the day in a way that made them seem almost sentient. Jeff, still in his costume, tried to shoo it away, but the chicken didn't move. Instead, more chickens appeared out of nowhere, gathering around the first one. They all faced us, silent except for that one, continuous, bone-chilling cluck. Ashton whispered, "Dude, this is freaky. Let's get out of here." But as we turned to leave, more chickens emerged from the fields, lining the road. They began to cross, not chaotically, but in organized lines, like an army. Their feathers ruffled with each step, their eyes unblinking. We tried to drive away, but the chickens encircled our car, pecking at the tires, their beaks clacking against the metal. The sound was maddening. We sat there, trapped as night fell, our headlights doing little more than illuminating the endless stream of poultry. Then, something even more bizarre happened. The chickens started to mimic Jeff. They began to run back and forth across the road in unison, like they were mocking us. Each time they crossed, they clucked in sync, a sound that seemed to echo from the darkness beyond the light of our car. Hours passed, and we were too scared to even try to leave. The chickens kept up their ritualistic crossing until the first light of dawn. As the sun rose, they dispersed as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving us alone with our fear and confusion. My friends and I never spoke about that night, not really. We all went our separate ways after high school, but sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I see chickens by the side of the road. I always slow down, heart in my throat, half expecting to see them line up and ready to perform their eerie dance again. The costume? Jeff burned it, but I swear, every now and then, I hear that deep, resonant cluck in my dreams. It's a reminder of the night when a prank turned into something far more sinister, where the line between humor and horror blurred into a parade of feathers and fear. For AP Computer Science, we had to do this one project where we'd animate a simple scene using either the Aut or Swing libraries. I'm not sure how I got the idea, but I decided to animate a simple chicken made out of a few circles and rectangles crossing a basic road made out of black and yellow rectangles. It was supposed to be a playful take on the old "why did the chicken cross the road" gag. I coded it with care, adding little details like the chicken bobbing its head and the occasional car passing by. When I presented my project, everyone laughed, and the teacher even commented on how well I captured the essence of the joke. But after that day, things took an unsettling turn. That night, I left my computer on while I slept, the screensaver showing my chicken crossing animation looping endlessly. At some point, I woke up to the sound of clucking. At first I thought it was my imagination or some weird dream hangover, but the sound was persistent, coming from outside my window. I peered out into the dim morning light, and there it was, a chicken, standing right where the road would be in my animation, staring up at my window as if it knew I was watching. It clucked once, turned, and crossed the actual road in front of my house, moving in the exact same way as my digital chicken. I shrugged it off as a bizarre coincidence, but every morning after, there was another chicken, following the same exact path. Each one seemed to mimic my animation more precisely, their movements uncanny in their replication. I started to feel watched, like my project had somehow bridged a gap between the digital and the real. One weekend, I decided to alter my animation, adding a slight detour for the chicken to take. The next day, the real chickens followed suit. I was both fascinated and horrified. My friends thought I was joking when I told them, but then they saw it too, the chickens not just crossing, but performing the exact movements I'd programmed. I stopped running the animation, hoping to break whatever connection had formed, but the chickens didn't stop. They continued their daily crossing, now with a purpose that felt malevolent, their numbers growing. Neighbors started complaining about the incessant clucking, the chaos at dawn, as if the chickens were staging a protest or a ritual. One evening, during a storm, I heard a loud cluck, and not like any I'd heard before. It was deep, echoing, and almost like a warning. I looked out to see not one, but dozens of chickens, their eyes reflecting the lightning, all staring at my house. They didn't cross, instead they just circled my place, their clucks forming a haunting symphony. The next day I found my computer had turned itself on, the screen flickering to life with my chicken animation playing on its own. Only now, the chicken wasn't alone. Shadowy figures of other chickens had been added, moving in unison, crossing the road like a spectral flock. I decided to destroy my project, deleting every trace of the code, but the chickens kept coming. They've been a fixture in our neighborhood ever since, a daily reminder of something I unwittingly summoned. And now, when I see any chicken, I can't help but feel a chill, wondering what else might cross over from my digital world into ours. And to think, all of this was because of a simple school project that turned into something far beyond my control. My family had chickens growing up, and by the time I was 10, I thought I knew pretty much everything there was to know about them. But oh boy, was I in for a surprise. One summer evening, my sister and I were playing near the road close to our farm when we noticed something peculiar. A chicken from our coop, one we called Rusty for his reddish feathers, was crossing the road. But it wasn't just any crossing, it was deliberate, almost ceremonial. We laughed at first, thinking it was just Rusty being quirky. But then, every day at the same time, more chickens started to join him. It wasn't long before all our chickens were participating in the silent march across the road, their movements in perfect sync. It was eerie, like they were under some sort of spell or command. The other townsfolk started noticing too. People would slow down their cars, some even stopping to watch, confused by this daily ritual. Then the chickens began to gather in the middle of the road, not just crossing but forming patterns, circles, and lines, like they were part of some dark avian cult. One night, we woke to the sound of clucking that seemed to fill the air. Outside, the chickens were everywhere, not just crossing but surrounding our house, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light in the moonlight. My parents tried to scare them off, but they wouldn't budge. The clucking grew louder and more insistent, creating a cacophony that felt like it was seeping into our bones. That's when the news broke about similar occurrences worldwide. Chickens everywhere were behaving this way, crossing roads, gathering, disrupting traffic. Panic spread, theories about everything from alien signals to ancient curses circulated. Then, out of nowhere, Elon Musk stepped in. He introduced his latest project, the Cyber Chicken, a robotic bird designed to mimic and interact with real chickens. He claimed it was part of his vision for sustainable living, but in this crisis, it became our savior. Musk deployed hundreds of cyber chickens, which look like futuristic versions of our feathered friends but with glowing metallic feathers and eyes. They also had LED lights in their eyes, and these shimmered constantly. The robots began to infiltrate the flocks, their movements synchronized with the real chickens' patterns. Then the cyber chickens didn't just blend in, they led. They started to guide the real chickens away from the roads and towards open fields, with a command system that seemed to communicate on a frequency only the chickens could understand. Slowly, the clucking subsided, the patterns in the road dissolved, and the chickens returned to normal behavior, as if waking from a dream. Musk explained it as a case of mass animal hypnosis, possibly triggered by some environmental or cosmic anomaly. His cyber chickens had disrupted this hypnotic effect with their own signals, breaking the spell. The chickens went back to being just chickens, pecking around, occasionally crossing roads for legitimate reasons, but never again in that organized, terrifying manner. The cyber chickens, however, became a fixture in our community, a reminder of that strange summer when the world learned to be wary of what might lie beyond simple animal behavior. And as for me, I learned that no matter how much you think you know about something, there's always room for the unexpected. And that's especially true when it involves Elon Musk and his innovative solutions to life's most bizarre problems.